Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to How to Evolve Your Cybersecurity Program with a Threat Profile. Please give a warm welcome to Bruce Large and Jared Cunningham. Don't forget, for your questions and answers, please pop it in the conference app.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to our presentation this afternoon. I'll just introduce ourselves first, whilst, of course, as expected, Bruce cracks open a beautiful can of Moffat Beach's finest. My name's Jared Cunningham. I'm from Raven. We're based in Sunshine Coast, small cybersecurity company. Background is mostly military, which is what you'll find through the course of this presentation. I don't know if Bruce needs to introduce himself. I've heard that if you don't know Bruce, you don't know cyber. So yeah, but we'll let him have a go.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for the warm introduction. How's everyone going? You're a tough audience. So I'm Principal Cybersecurity Architect at B Large, background in IT and OT, and working with Jared on cybersecurity threat profiles. Next slide. Today we're going to talk about our cybersecurity threat intelligence in 5 minutes, why the need for a cybersecurity threat profile, what is a cybersecurity threat profile, talk through some use cases, and kind of end on a worked example to try and show you what good looks like. And then we've actually left quite a bit of time for Q&A. So I think very keen to get questions. Make sure you use the app. And off to you, Jared.
Thanks, mate. Like I said, I'm ex-military, so I was going to start with a quote from Clausewitz or Blackadder, but I've gone with Sun Tzu here. Know your enemy, know yourself. You can fight 100 battles, etc., 1,000 battles without disaster. What we're going to do, we're talking threat profiles here, and basically I think some of it's a way of thinking. So what I want to kind of impart here is a bit of my way of thinking. My way of thinking comes from that time in the military, in the British and the Australian military, and we're taught to think about, well, what's going to make our day really bad, and how are we going to prevent our day from being really bad, ultimately is what these questions are all about. So knowing your enemy is the first thing. There's loads of presentations here on threats, as they quite rightly should be. We know the threat environment is just constantly evolving. It's really hard to keep up. The evil letters of A and I, when put together, they're obviously escalating that to an nth degree. So knowing your enemy it's an obvious. We need to know what the enemy is. We need to know what the threat is. Sometimes, though, people miss out the second part of that, and that's knowing yourself. It's all very well knowing that X threat actor is doing this in Ukraine, in Russia, in China, wherever it may be. But what does it mean to me? Can I translate that to defending the assets that I'm defending? Does it mean anything to my mission? So, way of thinking there, obviously great military leader, of course, General Melchett, one of the finest military minds of all time. My way of thinking then is based on what we call the 7 questions, the combat estimate. And there are lots of different methodologies behind this, lots of different military ways of doing this. This is what I was taught in day 1, week 1 in the Army, British Army. And there are 7 questions, and all it is a way of thinking whereby you understand the situation, you work out what you've got to do, and you come up with a plan for how you can successfully do that. Now, the first 3 questions are there. And the first 2 are the really important ones, of course. First one was, what are the enemy doing and why? That's focusing on the threat, focusing on who is going to give you a really bad day. Second one is, what have I been told to do and why? What's my mission? What am I protecting? What am I meant to do to successfully achieve my objectives for the day? Third one then is, what actions and effects do you want to go? That's kind of, well, okay, I know what the bad guys are doing. I know what I'm meant to do. Right, what do I need to do to build my plan? What effects do I need to have? What are my objectives? Do I need to protect something? Or do I need to go on the attack? Much easier in the Army context. It's kind of, straight down the middle, loads of smoke, massive amount of ammunition. Bit different than this. But the key question, though, that I think we'll keep saying through this presentation, though, is the one that whenever you're considering threat, whenever you're considering anything kind of related to this, you should always ask yourself, and that is, so what? What are the enemy doing and why? What is the threat actor doing? What is he going to try and exploit? So what? What does that mean to me? Is that threat actor relevant to me? Can they attack me? Do I have the mitigations in place? What have I been told to do and why? Well, I've got this asset and I need to protect it. And it's like, well, so what? How do I protect it? What am I protecting it from? Always ask that next question. So CTI, bit of a passion of mine and Bruce's, hence the beers cracked open there, because this is the kind of thing we spent many hours talking about in the pub.
At the pub, yes.
Yeah, particularly when the Broncos are losing.
It's a tough season.
Bit more of a way of thinking, and people have different ways of articulating what's kind of behind me there, but just kind of the way I like to look at it is, yeah, there's loads of information out there, there's loads of data. That's great. We need that. We need that data. We need that information. It's an inevitable part of our life these days. But what does it mean to me? It's that, so what? What does it mean? And the distinction that I think we need to make between information and intelligence is that information's already happened. I always get a little bit upset when people tell me, oh, we've got IOCs. They're like, yeah, we've got intelligence. Like, well, it's a part of it. But the clue's in the name. It's indicators of compromise. It's already happened. It's like, what's going to happen next? That's what I want to know. That's what CTI, to me, should be all about. What is likely to happen next? Yeah, the 101 of this, yeah, what is CTI? I think the pretty informed audience at AUSCERT, but you know, 3 tiers, we're just coming quickly: strategic, operational, tactical. Some people have operational and tactical the other way around. Some can also put technical at the bottom if you want to distinguish that. I think it's important that you need all 3 to have effective intelligence. You need to understand, like, what's the big picture, what's the context, what's happening in the Wild West, that you can then start to narrow down your focus to, right, what does that mean to my operations? What does it mean to my daily business as usual? And then you get down to the, well, so what? Then you get to the tactical layer of, right, let's look at, you know, this asset, this threat, let's look at the tactics, techniques, procedures, and really start to get into the details. So I think you need all 3 layers there to have an effective CTI capability. And then on the right there, you can see the key things there. It's not intelligence if it is not relevant. If it's not relevant to you, it's just noise. It's probably just information. It needs to be actionable. Like, if you can't do something with it, then what's the point? Yeah. So relevant, actionable, contextual. I normally says timely. There we go. Contextual, like, it needs to be in the right context. It needs to give you the ability to understand what's going on there. Timely, for some reason it's not up there. If you don't get it in time, it's already too late. It becomes information. It becomes something that's already happened. So you've got to get it to the right people at the right time. And of course, accurate, as I've accurately gone through the order there in the right order. It's got to be accurate. And that's often hard to do. And that's where you kind of got to understand, right, the value of certain sources of intelligence will be better than others, but you've got to understand all of that together to make it effective. And how do we do it then? The intelligence cycle, again, goes back to kind of military thinking and all the rest of it, but it's a great process. The thing you've got to start with isn't the shiny platform that costs a lot of money and looks really, really cool. You've got to actually start with a plan. You've got to understand what it is that you're collecting. And that's the first part of this is the planning. The planning, understanding your context, and then getting the direction. Right, these are our intelligence requirements. This is what we need to understand. These are the questions we need answering.
I think on that, over the beers tonight, come see us about PIRs.
Yeah.
And we're going to get complicated.
And next phase, collection. Right, you know what the questions are you need answering. We'll go and get the data, go and get the information so that you can answer those questions. Then you need to process that data. You've got to make it useful. You've got to put it into a format where you can actually do something with it, whether it's a human or a machine, whatever tools you're using to do that. You need to analyze and produce the intelligence. Analysis is where art and engineering kind of come together. I find, personally, like, and I working in that national security space for quite a while, haven't yet found the algorithm that can kind of detect the absence of the normal, the presence of the abnormal, that gut feel. I think there's still a big part for good human analysis in this. And then the dissemination, that comes back to the timeliness of it. You've got to get it to the right person or machine at the right time in a format that they can consume it. So the dissemination is important. And the other thing with all of this, around all of that, is a continuous feedback loop. Because when you get back to the start, you go, well, did that answer my questions? Right, what are my next questions? How do I answer those? So it's a continuous cycle. Threat profiles. So that's me. That's my version of the CTI 101. We're into threat profiles then. What are they all about? Well, this is kind of where I believe you need to start with any CTI program, really. You need to start with that baseline of, right, understanding what is my environment. What is it that I actually need to know, need to understand? So for me, threat profile, it needs to be structured. You need to, come back to the intelligence requirements, have a plan for what it is that you're doing. It needs to be specific to you. This isn't something that is exactly the same for even organizations in your same sector. This should be very specific, very personal. We should focus on the real-world threats. And we'll run through a worked example at the end, which is a big scenario, but actually it's based on those real-world threats that are out there. Again, got to be actionable. You don't just want a profile that you can't do anything with. It looks really cool, and you can have some cool graphics, but if you can't do something with it, what's the point? And this is proactive. I put proactive because for me, this is like, if you're actually looking at this and thinking about this, well, you're being really proactive in your security posture. You're starting to look at, right, where can things go wrong? What can I do about it? And it's real. It's focused on those real-world threats. The kind of things that can go into it then, look, it's an open book, I think. I think there's no shortage of ideas on what can contribute to an effective threat profile. Again, going back to it being personal, you're going to want different things answered. You're going to need to understand your priority intelligence requirements and your supporting intelligence requirements and all that. So it's be personal. But there's some ideas that can you can put into the threat profile. And you can break it down different ways. I've heard some parts called a digital footprint. A lot of it you can look at your attack surface and look at all that. But yeah, they're just some ideas on what can go into threat profile. Bruce, I need a beer.
I'm chomping at the bit. It's the longest I've been quiet in a long time. I kind of make the joke to make a threat profile accessible. It's what's important to us, how are we going to get messed up, different to the language I used yesterday when I wasn't being recorded, and what are they going to do it, right? So if you think about those three things, you're going to be in a good space. Maybe just some context too. Jared actually developed a threat profile for me at a previous employer, and it was so good that now I want to work with him. So that's a bit of a plug. So look, it'd be remiss of me to not talk about the AUSCSF at a session. Who here's looked into the AUSCSF? May show of hands. Thanks, Gareth. We got Gareth. Yeah, cool. Has anyone used the C2M2? Yep, cool. So the C2M2 actually defines what a threat profile is, which is great. So, kind of similar to what we've been talking about. It's this characterization of likely intent, capability, and targets for a threat to the function, talking about one or more threat assessments and how it evolves, addressing IT and OT, but really just helping us understand how we identify feasible threats, right? Because it is quite, there's a lot of things that could happen. So what's that most credible, most likely, most dangerous? So in terms of the practices, threat 2E kind of drives through, hey, you develop a threat profile and you document it. But importantly, the threat profile then touches heaps of parts of your security program. So, it touches architecture, for example. So how can you use a threat profile to inform your architecture? Some people might have been in my session yesterday where we kind of touched on that. I think it's really important, right? If you haven't kind of got a common view of what is happening, it's hard for you to understand how to defend against it. In program, right? So how do we use our threat profile to understand our investments, like what we should be, doing in projects, what we should be spending money on, how we should be developing our teams? Response, like a threat profile is really, really useful to help build detection engineering activities and how you can actually use this to feed and inform your risk processes. Response, so continuity plans, so using a threat profile to help inform BCP and incident response activities. And yeah, as we touched on, this idea of how you can use a threat profile to build detection engineering capabilities. And finally, the workforce, so using your threat profile to understand what kind of attacks will be happening against you, and is your team developed in a way that you can kind of defend and disrupt those attacks. So kind of drilling into this in a bit more detail, I kind of wanted to walk through ways I've used the threat profile. So one of the really great first starting points is executive briefings. So as I mentioned, Jared did a threat profile for us. I was able to use that for quarterly briefings with my leadership team. So it really helps how you can kind of get on a page what your strategic threats are and what is of interest of your organization. That could be your industry, your geography. You can kind of use it to understand what is applicable to you, right? It's also a great document for explaining the background and the why and the context, and as mentioned, kind of geography, factors of interest. So for example, if you work in critical infrastructure, there's quite different threat actor groups, whether you're in electric, water, telecoms, those kind of things. So being able to show to your executive team like what is credible and what could be targeting you is quite important. The other really great thing is it can help you articulate those emerging tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? And we'll touch on this when we get into architecture. And it's also just a really useful reference document you can come back to, so you can share it beforehand, you can use it to help drive conversations, all that good stuff. Now, one of my primary reasons for wanting it was to inform my risk management program. So, there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you're critical infrastructure, and you have to prioritize, right? So like, what is a credible risk? So you can use this to kind of bring in inform for your likelihood and threats, and pulling in real world examples, right? It is interesting to look at the theoretical, but I find with most business stakeholders, the what could happen to us now or what's imminent actually, is a lot more important. And also, it's really useful for when you want to tailor relevant scenarios, right? So your risk register should be scenario driven. Don't know about you guys, but I love seeing there's a risk of Windows 7. Cool. That's actually not a risk. But yeah, like you can use it to build could be Ukraine 2015, could be what we've seen with Volt Typhoon, could be what we've seen with Pipe Dream. Kind of using these scenarios to make it real in a risk management programs, super important. It's good to see some nodding heads. I don't know about you guys, but nothing brings me more joy than, well, how did we get to that likelihood in the risk matrix? I don't know, I just had some vibes on the day. Okay, cool, that's not really defensible. So something I kind of used was hey, has this been seen in our industry? Has this been seen globally? Has this been seen locally? Because then you kind of remove a bit of the subjectivity, right? Because sometimes, depending on the day and the biases of the people in the room, your risk assessment can be wildly different, which is not good. And yeah, again, most likely, most dangerous. How are we prioritizing those guardrails for doing stuff? So, informing your cybersecurity architecture. I'm an architecture nerd, so I need to talk about architecture. So, really important if we're understanding threat actor tactics, techniques, and procedures, understanding how our architecture can thwart that, right? So it might be a bit hard to see, but who here's seen these MITRE ATT&CK heat maps before? Yeah, nice, good show of hands. So what I like to see is understanding an attack kill chain and knowing what architectural capabilities I have to stop that. So case in point, left of boom, right of boom. If I've had a compromise and I have lateral movement, having architectural capabilities stopping lateral movement is a great way to mess up a threat actor's day in your environment. So being able to pull your threat profile to understand what is applicable to you is super useful when you're building business cases and improving your architecture. Now, who here likes vulnerability management? Oh, come on. Are you guys being paid? No, look, vulnerability management is painful, right? The reason it's painful is we just can't patch everything. It's an optimization game, right? So you can pull a threat profile to help you understand, is this going to kill us, right? If you've only got so much time and you can only patch, so many things, what do you do first? And sometimes that's useful to know what's happening in your, industry or region. We've seen lots of examples of edge devices being compromised, for example. A few years back, the most likely kind of TTP was, say, phishing. We're kind of seeing that now move to edge devices being compromised. Having beers with people, one of the challenges now is threat actors have mapped out people's environments. So when a CVE drops, we're talking about compromise within, sub-hour. Super hard to defend against, right? Especially if you haven't got a threat profile. Something you want to add, Jared?
No.
Okay, I'm seeing some nodding. I'm going to get beer. Now, who here does detection engineering? Nice, very good. I saw a few hands. So, out of interest, do you have a threat profile? Or no, cool. So I want to see a strong yes next year, because as a detection engineer, a threat profile is awesome, right? It's really effective way for a CTI function to task a detection engineering function with, can we detect this? The other really useful thing It'll articulate your critical assets, and it'll articulate credible and likely TTPs. Perfect for kicking off a detection engineering lifecycle. That's something I found really useful, with the one you did for me. So, worked example time. I'm going to have to give back the clicker.
Yeah.
And we're actually doing good for time. This is good.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We're just going to completely screw that up right now.
Yes, we're going so well.
Worked example. What we're going to do, we'll start with some big hands on a small map and just kind of step through a bit of thinking around how this works. The scenario we're going to choose is, of course, the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. I think we've all got through the first threat to the Olympic Games, which is politics, and we're going to get a nice new stadium. So what's the context? What's the point of doing this in the first place? Why do we need to worry? Well, obviously, one, this is a massive event. If you're not aware it's happening already, then you kind of, I don't know where you've been. You've certainly not been in Queensland, certainly. It's got global visibility, which makes it a target. Whenever these events happen around the world, they effectively become a target. Why is that? It's not just because it's high profile. It's not just because the British are going to come here and win more medals than the Australians.
Unlikely.
It's because of what's going on around the world. So geopolitical tensions, etc. We do not know right now what's going to be happening in 2032, yet alone if any of us are going to be alive in 2032, the way things are going. So these are all the things that you'd be considering. That big strategic, like what's going on? What could it mean to me? What have we done to offend those main protagonists that are out there? Our neighbours to the north, or our good friends over in Russia. People, I think, sometimes think, well, does that strategic stuff really mean anything at that kind of operational, tactical level? Like, do they really care? Are we going to see an effect in Australia? I just think one generalised example here is when Australia announced that they were donating Bushmasters and vehicles to Ukraine to fight the Russians, the increase in activity which originated in Russian-based actors, it was a massive increase down here. I see a few nodding heads, so you kind of know what I'm talking about there. What happens around the other side of the world does have an impact here. It does matter here. So when we put the biggest spotlight possible on Queensland during this event, everyone's going to be looking. Everyone's going to be paying attention. It's also the opportunity. Criminal actors, they're looking for an opportunity. Whenever something comes up and you see it with state of origin next week, we'll probably see some state of origin related scams in some way or whatever. But it's an opportunity for criminal actors. So again, that spotlight's there. They're going to be looking. They're going to be seeking for ways to exploit. And their motivations will be different in this case, often more driven by money than anything else. But they're going to be looking. They're going to be interested. And also the local issues, local grievances, the local lunatics that want to, concrete themselves to something just to make a point whilst that's going on. These are all those big kind of contextual things that we need to be thinking about when we're asking that question, or the first two questions. What are the enemy doing and why? What's the threat doing? What is the threat going to be? Why? So what? What are they going to do? What are we protecting and why? Like, how are we going to protect ourselves? So that's the big picture kind of context of what we are going to go through. If this works. Technical failure.
Hey, there we go.
There we go. We're missing. Hang on. Oh, no. Sorry. So we'll start by, taking that military mindset to things. I need to remember that we're not dropping bombs in this case, but if I was to drop bombs, what's the first thing I'd look at? Well, one of the very obvious things is to look at is venues. Right now it's easy because I'm not sure how many of them actually exist, but we're going to have a load of venues there. And that's going to be the obvious thing to look at when we're looking at the threat to the Olympic Games. So target number one is your physical facilities, the place you're going to draw people to, the place you're going to put that spotlight on. What else can we target? Hey, Bruce, this is your bag, isn't it, mate? Trains?
Yes, planes, trains, and automobiles. Actually, if you just want to, So not only is it where people are, it's, well, how do they get to it? Now, Jared and I were discussing, for example, the Paris Olympic Games, right? Pains me to say, someone attacked the trains. It's right, deep in the heart. But no, physical sabotage of train signalling equipment, right? So if we want to disrupt things, if we want to kind of achieve an effect, maybe, discredit a political or kind of movement or just send a big message, disrupting an event is a great way to do that. And, I think understanding those courses of action and what's the easiest way to achieve that is important. So if we just want to like disrupt an event, you could stop people getting to the event. Now there's going to be multiple ways, it could be kind of heavy rail, could be buses. They'll also have alternative ways. So I think knowing about that's important. I think our next slide, we kind of start looking at other.
And I think on that, that's one of the key things there is, so what is the effect? So getting that question, what effect on the enemy are looking at, what effect can I have? An effect they could have is disruption. A disruptive effect at this will really, it will discredit whoever's organising it. You could have the most perfect security, you could have the most perfect setup, the most brilliant opening ceremony, but if there was an attack on the transport at, let's say, Bowen Hills, I'm pretty sure that would cripple the entire Queensland rail network.
Yep.
But if that happens, their attention would be drawn to that over there. So the enemy would have achieved their effect. You wouldn't have achieved your effect of having an uninterrupted opening ceremony of the Olympic Games because of something that happened away from it. And those attacks in the Paris Olympics, they were a long, long way from Paris, from what I understand. I mean, it was well coordinated, it was really quite well executed and also quite basic. But
and sometimes, it's not just cyber, it could be kinetic, it could even be disinformation operations.
Absolutely, yeah, all of those things. So what are the other targets? Other targets?
Power supplies. Yeah, okay, could be relevant. So, things like SOCI makes it very clear there's this nexus of critical infrastructure. So power's absolutely at the center of that. And we've seen that just in normal kind of natural disasters. There is a certain buffer, but once you get through that, say 10 to 12 hours, things get complicated. There's other things like command and control. So, maybe we're not just targeting, physical equipment in the field, but we're targeting control centers. So case in point, if we think about the Ukraine 2015, not only did they target an electric control system, but they also targeted the phone system. So people couldn't call in to say, hey, the lights aren't working. So if we're trying to sow confusion and disorder, we're going to find the easiest place to do that. And us thinking about this before it happens puts us in a lot better position.
Which is linked, I think, to broadcast and media. I think if the people want to know what's going on, if they hear something happening in one place, well, you can spread disinformation to make what's going on seem a lot worse than it actually is. So another viable target really would be media, the broadcast facilities, all of that kind of stuff, the humongous setup that you get at these big events. Others, food supply, particularly relevant if you look at
this is concerning.
In the UK right now. And obviously everyone wants the burgers and that. But, again, I think food supply, what it's classified as under the SOCI Act, but it's there, it's critical. Our food supply is really important. So, again, something else you could target. And then finally, the thing I'd really seek to target, hearts and minds.
Oh, I thought it was drop bears, but anyway.
It is. It's can you imagine if word got out that Fergus the koala had, been kidnapped from Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary?
Oh no!
I don't know how.
Oh no!
What visiting politicians would do. No, it's like one of the things that you need to understand how to defend is the information environment, the information itself. Pretty sure there's a couple of talks on disinformation, which I find really fascinating at the moment, but it's something that we need to know what the truth is and make sure people know what the truth is. In a way, it's linked to that command and control. It's being able to coordinate and control the event and make sure people can safely go from A to B knowing what's going on and knowing that the information they're seeing is true and accurate. It's important. So from a targeting point of view, you'd most definitely be seeking to target the hearts and minds and watching out for drop bears.
So I was kind of keen to run through a case study. Has anyone heard of Olympic Destroyer? Yep. I know you know about it. So there's actually this awesome book, Sandworm, by Andy Greenberg, and he kind of walks through, maybe if we go to the next slide. So in the 2018 South Korean Winter Olympics opening ceremony, they actually had a cybersecurity incident targeting their critical IT infrastructure, and it was using this Olympic Destroyer malware. Now, what's really interesting about this, so if we think about our threat profile, we thought about our assets, we're now thinking about who wants to actually mess us up, right? So history is a good thing, it can give us some good examples. In this case, it's quite interesting because in this campaign, the threat actor actually was doing a false flag operation. So a false flag operation is where you kind of inject evidence to try and trick people into the attribution of who did it. So in this case, the initial analysis looked like North Korea. So you can imagine we have the Olympics, South Korea and North Korea don't really get along, bit of history there. So to kind of increase tensions, a third-party threat actor has disrupted it and also made it look like North Korea, which is quite bad. So to me, this is a credible event, right? So if we're thinking about our threat profile, not only is it the kind of threat actors we've identified, but it might be thinking, well, what have they done previously? How do we prepare ourselves? Like, in this case, maybe a lesson is it's better to not release stuff too early in the incident response exercise, right? Because people will go, oh, we've now been targeted by our friends to the north, for example. So I think really great example of like what has happened. And, on that note, we shouldn't just think about like what's top of mind, what's in the media. We should be thinking, well, what else is out there? Who else would have a legitimate reason to want to target us? And through our threat profile, we can start documenting this. We think about that intelligence life cycle, a really good product to do dissemination, right? So it's all good in our heads, but if it's not getting out to people and it's not actionable, it's not timely, it's not going to help people.
Exactly. I find case studies are really useful in any kind of threat profile, because particularly when you're trying to, in a way, educate a non-technical audience, and you come up with these scenarios and they're like, that never happened, or they don't understand it, where you can bring out the case study that says it did happen, and this is how you can understand it. You can tell the story through them. So I find case studies are really quite useful as a tool.
And I think your speaker notes are really useful here, Jared. For example, like climate, right? We are talking about the 2032 Olympics being a climate-friendly and the most climate-neutral, I believe, even positive Olympics we've had. So, depending on a different organisation, they might want to expose, hey, well, Queensland has the biggest coal fleet in the country. So just thinking about, hey, like, why would we be targeted is going to be really good to figure out, hey, what should we be doing?
Yeah, I think Bruce is worried as a card-carrying member of the ALP there that people are calling them out.
Mate, love those big coal-fired power stations.
So that's question one, looking at the threat, understanding, right, who is likely to take it, who's done it before, who's got a gripe against it, who's going to be putting that spotlight on from the threat point of view. And then, question two, what have I been told to do? What am I protecting? What are my assets? We're going to have the physical assets, your stadium, the public spaces, the transport networks, digital assets, so ticketing systems, broadcast systems, command and control systems, public Wi-Fi, all those kind of things. You've got to be thinking of, right, what are my assets? What is it that I need to do and why? What are the implications of that? So what? How do I protect it? Who is likely to attack it, etc. This is how we start to really build these profiles out. Obviously, the human aspect of this as well. It's not just the information space. It's not just the punters that are coming to the stadium to watch sports. It's the athletes themselves. It's the staff around it. And you start thinking of all these different layers and the different kind of security considerations around that as you go. The VIPs who are going to be there as well. So what does that mean? We've got X president coming from Y country. Well, who's got an interest in them to cause a disruptive effect?
Capabilities they'll have with them as well,
Yeah. So, exactly, yeah. Where does that then, then you'll start looking at integration with other communications, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Just moving on then, we start to get in a bit more detail. There's a kind of tool technique that we like to use there of the following the kill chain and looking at each of those different steps and asking the same questions at each of those steps. It's like, well, what could happen at this stage? What are the enemy trying to do? How are they going to do it? What are their TTPs? And then what can I do about it? That's where you can start to then map it back to your controls, to your mitigations that you've got in place. So there's one attack path analysis kind of technique that you can use. There's so many cool techniques out there, and sometimes it just comes to get a whiteboard and just come up with ideas. And right, if I were the bad guy, put yourself in the enemy's shoes and think, right, how would I do this? How would I make your day really, really awful?
And I think those are really good too for how you engage with stakeholders, right? I think one of the good things about, and I think why we enjoy threat profiles, is you get to be an adversary. You get to think about how you would break systems. That doesn't always come natural to people that are too familiar with the system. Like what would stop me just hitting this or going kinetic? And people go, that'd be very bad. So these are like really great, powerful communication tools. So
they are. And I think it's fun to be the attacker. It's fun to be a bit nefarious and come up with wacky ideas and also less wacky ideas. You got the wacky ideas at one end, and I think it's fun to think through those and then bring it back down to what is realistic, what's feasible, how are they actually going to do this.
Definitely.
But then it's important to go to that question too, what have I been told to, what am I protecting? And for each of these steps, think, well, okay, what mitigations do I have in place for X tactic or technique, whatever, at each of those stages. So you can then have the confidence that your program is going to at least mitigate some of the things. And you can start to see where your holes are by kind of going through that profile activity. Just close the time a wee bit there.
Yes.
You then, it links back to your risk management. So it links back to understanding, well, what is the likelihood impact, all the rest of it. So you can see you're starting to build a realistic picture of who is likely to do what, how are they going to do it, why are they going to do it, when are they going to do it, all those kind of things. And you can start to think, right, okay, what does that mean? What's the impact? You can start to then prioritize based on your assessment there. Then, outcomes. Whew, nearly there.
Mate.
Didn't know how hot it was going to be up here.
No, it's really
No one
bright
told
too.
me that. But obviously, a few apps then. From this intelligence product point of view, you're going to have those strategic outputs. Obviously, your threat profile. That's your baseline. I think that's your start line for anything, really, is understanding what that profile is. And then you just keep it updated. You just keep aware of the changes in your environment, keep understanding what's going on. You can look at the operational outputs from that. You can then start to develop playbooks as to, right, we know this could happen, therefore, what would we do when that happens? It's kind of linking to your response planning there. And then, the tactical side of it as well. If you know that this is likely to happen and this is how they were likely to do it, well, you can start to look for it and understand that it may happen there. So, there's some of the intelligence outcomes from that.
Yeah. And maybe hit us with some questions, because we got about 5 minutes.
Fantastic. We do have a lot of great questions coming through the app, but I'm sure they can find you with a beer later and pick your brain.
You know us too well.
First one I'll ask, what are some best practices for integrating shared intelligence into an existing CTI program?
Oh, that's a good one. Probably don't just immediately jump to tooling. I think understanding process and understanding, if we think about CART, is it relevant? Is it accurate? Is it timely? I think too often we see people just grabbing generic threat feeds and thinking, more is better. Sometimes it's quality over quantity.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the start of the intelligence cycle. Your planning and direction. It's do your planning, understand what it is that you need to answer first, and then the collection is, right, what are the sources? What have I already got? How can I already answer these things that I didn't really know I had? It gives you a bit of structure. It gives you that, right, these are my priority intelligence requirements. These are things I must know. And then you can break those down into questions, really. It's about asking the right questions so you get meaningful answers to.
And hot take, AI doesn't make that better.
Fantastic, thank you. And then our next one, which will be our last one, I'm sorry. We see incidents like attacks on the Ukraine electric grid overly used as a credible case study for the real world physical threats. It's one thing to consider what has happened, but how can we plan for what might or hasn't happened yet, particularly with the adoption of new technologies, i.e. battery and energy or AI?
This sounds like a Dan question.
Nailed it.
Yeah, no, and look, I think it's a great point. I think one of the challenges is they're public, and there are other things we can't talk about that are not public. But, big fan of Rob M. Lee, kind of the argument is, look, there's enough stuff that's public that you should be doing and considering, and if you're building defenses for that, it will help with the emerging threats. But I think that's the benefit of high trust information sharing groups and briefings and those kind of things. You can talk about more emerging. I think people are probably just relieved that we're not still talking about Stuxnet and the Mauritius Shire Council events. But I think looking at these emerging things like what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, Stuxnet or say the pipe dream kind of scenarios, they're actually quite relevant as well.
I think it's just a lesson that we can learn from history, literally, in that we need to learn from what's happened before. Now, it may be that, things have changed and we've moved on, or it's not. People can get very excited about things that aren't relevant to them, like, how Stuxnet was actually delivered and all that kind of stuff. But it is important to know that it's part of your armory, really, looking at what has been learned from before. And that's the key differentiation, isn't it? It's kind of lessons identified and lessons learned. It's like, yeah, look at it, pick out what's happened, but what did we actually learn from that now applies to what we're doing now? So it doesn't need to be that literal translation of this attack happened there to them. It's right, well, where did it go wrong? There's all sorts of different ways you can draw out the learnings from that. But I think we've got to look at cases. We've got to look at what's happened before, so we can start to think, right, okay, we know that can happen. We know these are the kind of ways that this actor thinks or not, and then we can start to put ourselves in their shoes and start to think, right, how would I do that? Noting I've now got this technology, or I've got this asset, or this is the new target. So I think learning from those previous attacks is pretty valuable to any future kind of implementation of threat intelligence.
100%. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And can everyone please join me in thanking Jared and Bruce?
Hey.
Cheers.
Very good. Nice.